Three men approach elderly couple, not realizing a cop is watching them. On an ordinary afternoon at the local gas station, the air carried the familiar scent of gasoline mixed with the freshness of the surrounding greenery. This station was a regular stop for many locals, a place to refuel and grab a few essentials. Today it was no different, except for the presence of three young black men, whose appearance commanded attention. Jock, Costo, and Freddie, dressed in a distinctive street style, stood out with their leather jackets, baseball caps, and visible tattoos. Their outfits, a blend of sportswear and urban fashion, made them look like they had just stepped off a music video set. The trio moved confidently, scanning the shelves for snacks and soda, seemingly unaware of the cautious glances cast their way. As they browsed, their casual banter filled the small convenience store, a mix of laughter and teasing remarks. They were comfortable in their space, clearly familiar with the surroundings and the routine of their visit. The store clerk, initially tense, relaxed a bit as the men showed no signs of trouble, just three friends out for some snacks. Suddenly, Freddie, the tallest of the three with a sleeve of intricate tattoos running down his arm, spotted something outside the window. With a swift movement, he nudged Jock, who was reaching for a bag of chips. "Yo, check it out," he said, his voice low but clear. He nodded towards the window, where an elderly couple struggled with their groceries. Jock turned to look, followed by Costo, who had been engrossed in choosing a soda. They all watched, the atmosphere suddenly tense. Freddie took a step closer to the window, his eyes narrowing as he observed the elderly couple's struggle. The woman, frail and shaky, leaned heavily on her husband, who seemed just as unsteady. Without a word, Freddie gave Jock a deliberate tap on the shoulder, then jerked his chin toward the door. As they stepped outside, the sight of the elderly couple became clearer, and the situation unfolded before them. Mrs. Rose Grist, a delicate figure of 89, leaned heavily on her cane, each step an arduous effort. Her frail hands trembled slightly as she tried to maintain her balance, her knuckles white from gripping the cane too tightly. Her face, etched with lines of a long life lived, showed a mixture of determination and exhaustion. Beside her stood Mr. David Grist, a venerable man of 100 years, whose stature, though stooped with age, still held a hint of the strength he once possessed. He carried a small bag of groceries, his arms straining under even the lightest weight, and occasionally glanced at his wife with concern. David's eyes softened as he watched Rose struggle. He shifted the bag to his other hand and reached out to her, offering steadying support. "Take it slow, Rose," he murmured, his voice gentle but firm. "We're in no rush." Rose nodded, her lips curling into a small, grateful smile. She knew that David was just as weary, if not more, but he never showed it. His love for her had always been evident in the small gestures, like how he would hold her hand just a bit tighter when they crossed a busy street, or how he would insist on carrying the groceries despite his own frailty. As they made their way towards their car, parked a little too far from the entrance, David carefully guided Rose with one hand while trying to manage the groceries with the other. He spoke softly, encouraging her with every step. "Just a few more, darling. We're almost there." As David and Rose inched closer to their car, they suddenly felt a shadow cast over them, blocking the warm afternoon sun. Startled, Rose tightened her grip on David's arm, and he instinctively stepped in front of her, a protective gesture born out of love and concern. Turning around, they were met with the imposing figures of the three young men. From their perspective, the trio seemed almost towering, their muscular builds accentuated by the street-style clothing they wore. The men stood with a certain air of confidence. Jock, with his broad shoulders and tattoos peeking out from under his jacket, Costo, with a slightly intimidating stance and a serious expression, and Freddie, the tallest, who had an air of authority about him. To the elderly couple, their appearance was both startling and somewhat unsettling. "What do you want?" David's voice was steady but cautious, his eyes darting between the young men. He positioned himself squarely between Rose and the trio, determined to shield her from any potential threat. For a moment the air was thick with tension. Then, unexpectedly, Freddie's stern expression softened into a warm, genuine smile. It was a stark contrast to the intimidating facade they had just witnessed. "We just want to help," Freddie said, his voice gentle and sincere. He stepped forward, reaching out his hands. Let us carry those for you. Before David could respond, Freddie carefully took the grocery bag from his hand, handling it as if it were precious cargo. Jock and Costo followed suit, their tough exteriors melting away as they approached. Jock, with a nod of reassurance, took Rose's arm gently, providing support. Don't worry, Mum, he said with a respectful tone. We've got you. Costo, his face lighting up with a friendly grin, moved to Rose's other side. Together, the young men guided the elderly couple towards their car, their strong arms providing stability. Under their assistance, the couple's steps became steadier, the burden of their frailty momentarily lifted. As they walked, Rose and David exchanged grateful glances with their unexpected helpers. Thank you, Rose whispered, her voice a mix of relief and gratitude. We weren't sure we could make it to the car on our own. Freddie chuckled softly, shaking his head. It's our pleasure, Mum. We just wanted to make sure you're both safe. The short journey to the car was filled with light-hearted conversation. The couple learned that the young men were locals, regulars at the gas station, who often helped out whenever they saw someone in need. Despite their rugged appearances, their words were kind and respectful, revealing a side that belied their tough exteriors. Upon reaching the car, the young men continued their acts of kindness. Jock, noticing the sun's harsh glare, raised his hand to shield Rose's eyes as she stepped into the vehicle. Here, let me help you with that, he offered, guiding her gently into the passenger seat. Just as Rose was about to sit down, she misjudged her step and stumbled, her cane slipping on the asphalt. In a swift motion, Jock and Costo caught her, their arms steadying her before she could fall. Rose gasped, her face momentarily twisting in pain, but she quickly composed herself, offering a shaky smile. I'm okay, she assured them, though her voice betrayed a hint of embarrassment. Thank you, boys, you've been wonderful. Meanwhile, Freddie hurriedly placed the grocery bag in the back seat, making sure everything was secure. He then moved to the driver's side, helping David with the door. The elderly man looked up at him, eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and admiration. You boys are a blessing, he said, patting Freddie's arm. Thank you for your kindness. Freddie smiled, nodding. Just doing what anyone would, sir. With the couple safely in their car, the young men stepped back, watching as David started the engine. Rose waved goodbye, a heartfelt smile on her face. Take care, you three, and thank you again. The car pulled away, leaving the young men standing by the curb. They watched until the vehicle disappeared from view, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over them. As they turned to leave, Jock chuckled, nudging Freddie with his elbow. Not bad for a bunch of scary-looking guys, huh? Freddie grinned, the smile reaching his eyes. Yeah, not bad at all. Meanwhile, as Officer Kenesha Carnegie patrolled the quiet streets, her trained eyes caught sight of a commotion at the local gas station. Through her windshield, she saw an elderly woman stumble and fall, her face contorted in pain. Beside her, two imposing figures loomed, and another man, appearing to rush, held a bag of groceries. The scene unfolded rapidly, and to Carnegie, it seemed like an all-too-familiar scenario, an assault in progress. Her mind raced, piecing together the fragments of what she perceived. The woman's fall, the looming figures, and the man clutching the bag. It seemed obvious. 3 young black men, dressed in street-style clothing, were robbing the elderly couple. The distressed expression on the woman's face only reinforced Carnegie's assumption. Without hesitation, she accelerated towards the scene, her heart pounding with a mix of duty and dread. By the time Officer Carnegie arrived, the elderly couple had driven away, leaving only the 3 men behind. She watched as they laughed and exchanged words, seemingly carefree. Her stomach tightened, the narrative in her mind solidifying. She parked her car and exited quietly, drawing her gun as she approached the group from behind. The situation was tense, and she knew she had to act swiftly and decisively. "Hands up, you're under arrest for robbery," she shouted, her voice firm and commanding. The suddenness of her approach startled the men, and they froze, the carefree moment shattered. Jock, Freddie, and Costo raised their hands, confusion and fear flickering across their faces. "What the hell?" Freddie muttered, looking bewildered. He glanced at the others, trying to comprehend the situation. Carnegie kept her weapon trained on them, her eyes sharp and unyielding. She quickly called for backup, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on her. Within minutes, additional patrol cars arrived, and officers swiftly moved in. The three men were forced against the wall, their hands cuffed behind their backs. "What's going on?" Jock asked, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "We didn't do anything wrong. We were helping the couple." Officer Carnegie's expression hardened. "Don't lie to me. I saw you with that woman's bag. I saw her face." "You expect me to believe you weren't robbing them?" The men exchanged incredulous looks. Costo shook his head, a bitter smile forming on his lips. "We were trying to help. She tripped and we caught her. That's all. We didn't take anything." Carnegie's skepticism was palpable. "Help? That's a good story, but I don't buy it. You think I'm stupid?" The officers tightened their grip on the men, and the tension thickened. The men's explanations seemed futile against the backdrop of Carnegie's hardened perception. The arrival of more officers only cemented the gravity of the misunderstanding. They moved efficiently, securing the scene and preparing to transport the men. As they were being led away, Jock turned his head, trying to catch Carnegie's eye. "You've got it wrong," he insisted, a mix of anger and desperation in his voice. "We were just trying to do the right thing." But Carnegie, resolute and convinced of her judgment, dismissed his words. To her, it was a clear case of a crime caught in the act, as the patrol cars drove away carrying the three men. The dimly lit jail cell was a stark contrast to the warm afternoon sun that had bathed the gas station earlier. The walls, stained with age and neglect, closed in around Jock, Freddie, and Costo. The air was heavy with the smell of damp concrete and a faint odor of something rotting, adding to the sense of despair. The room was small, barely enough space for the three men to sit on the metal benches bolted to the floor. The single barred window let in little light, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and distort their surroundings. Jock leaned against the cold wall, his hands still cuffed, his face set in a grimace. Freddie sat beside him, rubbing his wrists. The raw skin chafed from the tight metal. Costo paced the limited space, his frustration evident in every step. The silence was oppressive, filled only with the distant sounds of other prisoners and the occasional clang of metal doors. "They didn't even let us explain," Freddie muttered, breaking the silence. His voice was low, tinged with disbelief and anger. "All we did was help, and now we're in this dump." Costo stopped pacing, his fists clenched. "We should have just minded our own business," he snapped, his voice rising. "Trying to be good Samaritans, and look where it got us." Jock looked up, his eyes hard. "It wasn't wrong to help," he said firmly, though there was a note of doubt in his voice. "But yeah, maybe we should have been more careful. People see us and just assume the worst." Their conversation was interrupted by the clatter of keys and the echoing footsteps of a guard. "Keep it down in there," the guard barked, his voice cold and dismissive. The men fell silent, their frustration bubbling under the surface. Moments later, Officer Carnegie walked past the cell. Freddie, spotting her, jumped up and moved to the bars. Officer Carnegie," he called, desperation lacing his voice. The other two followed, crowding the front of the cell. She stopped, her eyes meeting theirs with a hard, dispassionate gaze. "We didn't do anything wrong," Jock began, his voice steady. "You can't just keep us here without evidence. We were trying to help that couple." Carnegie's face remained impassive. "I saw what I saw," she replied, her tone cold and mocking. "You were holding that woman's bag. She fell. You were robbing her." Costo stepped forward, gripping the bars. "We were helping her," he insisted, his voice tight with frustration. "She stumbled and we caught her. You didn't see everything." A flicker of doubt crossed Carnegie's face, but it quickly hardened into a mask of disdain. "Helping?" she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right, because guys like you are known for your charity work. What's next? You're going to tell me you're volunteers at the local soup kitchen?" Freddie's eyes narrowed. "So it's about how we look," he challenged. "You think because we're black, because we dress a certain way, that we're criminals?" Carnegie smirked, a cold, cruel edge to her expression. "Let's be real here," she said, her voice laced with venom. "Three black guys dressed like thugs, hanging around an old couple. You expect me to believe you weren't up to no good? You've probably got rap sheets longer than my arm." Jock's face darkened with anger. "That's not true," he said, his voice low and controlled. You don't know us. You don't know anything about us. Carnegie's eyes flashed with something harsh and unforgiving. Oh, I know your type, she retorted, her voice cutting. Always looking for trouble, always blaming others when you get caught. You people never take responsibility, always playing the victim. Her words were like a slap in the face, each one a deliberate insult. The implication was clear, and it stung more than the cuffs on their wrists. Freddie shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. So, you're just going to judge us because we're black? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carnegie didn't hesitate. Yeah, I am, she said bluntly, because people like you, people with your skin color, don't have a good track record and don't act so surprised. You know how it is. Black, young, and dressed like criminals, you're just asking for trouble. There was a heavy silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The men stared at her, a mix of anger, frustration, and resignation in their eyes. The sound of the door clanging shut behind her felt like a final condemning blow. As they sat back down, the reality of their situation settled over them like a suffocating blanket. The night had been long and unrelenting. The cold, hard reality of their situation weighed heavily on Jock, Freddie, and Costo. They sat in silence, their expressions blank and eyes dull, drained of the vibrant energy they once possessed. The oppressive atmosphere of the jail cell seemed to sap the life from them, leaving them hollow and defeated. As the first light of dawn crept into the cell, Jock leaned against the wall, his gaze fixed on the floor. Freddie sat hunched over, his hands clasped tightly, while Costo stared vacantly at the ceiling. The morning news played faintly from a television in the common area, the voices of the anchors blending into the background noise. It was just another reminder of the world outside, a world they felt unjustly cut off from. Suddenly, Freddie's attention snapped to the screen. A familiar scene played out, catching his eye. He nudged Jock, his voice barely a whisper. Hey, look, he said, pointing towards the TV. At first, Jock seemed disinterested, but something in Freddie's tone made him turn. His eyes widened as he recognized the footage. Costo, noticing the sudden shift in their demeanor, frowned. What now? He grumbled, not in the mood for any more surprises. But as he followed Freddie's pointing finger, his expression changed from irritation to shock. He scrambled towards the bars, trying to get a clearer view. On the screen, the scene from the gas station was playing. The video, shaky but clear, showed the three of them helping the elderly couple, their actions kind and considerate. The camera captured the exact moment when they steadied Mrs. Rose, Jock shielding her from the sun, and Freddie holding the grocery bag. The narration explained that the video had gone viral, amassing over 5 million views. The news anchor's voice was warm and enthusiastic. In an inspiring act of kindness, she began, 3 young men stepped in to assist an elderly couple at a local gas station, showing remarkable respect and care. The video of their good deed has captured the hearts of millions, amassing over 5 million views and counting. It just goes to show, you can't judge a book by its cover. These men, despite initial appearances, demonstrated that compassion and kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Jock's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. That's us, he whispered, a mixture of relief and disbelief in his voice. The realization hit them all at once. The truth was out, and the world was seeing them for who they truly were, not as the criminals they had been accused of. As they watched, Officer Carnegie approached the cell, her usual stern expression fixed in place. She noticed the men gathered at the bars, their eyes glued to the television. Her patience, already worn thin, snapped. "What are you idiots staring at?" she barked, her voice laced with irritation. "You think you're going to get sympathy now? You're lucky you're not facing more serious charges." She waited for the usual defiance or muttered curses, but none came. Instead, the 3 men remained silent, their focus entirely on the TV screen. Carnegie's brow furrowed in confusion, her irritation giving way to curiosity. She followed their line of sight, turning towards the television. The footage continued to play, showing the men's genuine concern and helpful actions. Carnegie's eyes widened in disbelief as the truth dawned on her. The video contradicted everything she had believed. The men weren't robbing the elderly couple. They were helping them. Her harsh words and preconceived judgments came rushing back, a bitter reminder of her own prejudices. She turned to face the three men who were now looking at her with a mix of triumph and quiet accusation. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her. Carnegie opened her mouth, struggling for words, but none came. She had been wrong, terribly wrong. The evidence was undeniable, and the expressions on the men's faces were a painful testament to the injustice they had suffered. Freddie broke the silence, his voice steady but soft. "We told you," he said, his tone devoid of anger, just a simple statement of fact. The other two nodded, their eyes locked on Carnegie, waiting for her response. The air was thick with tension, the truth hanging in the balance, exposed and undeniable. Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hall. A well-dressed man in a sharp suit appeared, his demeanor calm and authoritative. He walked with purpose, exuding a quiet confidence that demanded attention. As he reached the cell, he glanced at the three men before turning his attention to Officer Carnegie. "Good morning," he began, his voice smooth and composed. "My name is James Wilson. I am the personal secretary to Mr. and Mrs. Grist, the elderly couple these gentlemen assisted." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I've come to request their immediate release." Carnegie's eyes widened in surprise, her gaze shifting between Wilson and the three men. She hesitated, the weight of her earlier decisions pressing down on her. "Sir," she started, her voice uncertain. "There were suspicions of theft and—" Wilson cut her off, his tone sharp but controlled. "Officer, I believe you understand the gravity of wrongfully detaining individuals without proper evidence." His eyes narrowed slightly. "My employers are prepared to take legal action if necessary. These men are innocent, and any further delay in their release could result in serious repercussions." The threat hung in the air, undeniable and potent. Carnegie's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She knew she was cornered. The evidence, or lack thereof, was not on her side. With a reluctant nod, she signaled for the cell door to be opened. As the door swung open, Jock, Freddie, and Costo stepped out, their expressions a mix of relief and lingering resentment. Carnegie looked down, her voice barely a whisper as she muttered, "I'm sorry." Her apology felt hollow, lost in the vast space between her and the men she had wronged. Freddie turned to her, his eyes hard. "Sorry?" he echoed, his voice thick with emotion. "You think a sorry makes up for what you did? For judging us by our skin color? Our clothes?" His voice rose, a dam of anger and frustration breaking. "You saw what you wanted to see. A group of black men, and thought we were criminals. You never even gave us a chance." Jock placed a hand on Freddie's shoulder, a silent plea for calm. He looked at Carnegie, his gaze steady. "We all make mistakes," he said, his voice softer but still firm. "But maybe you learned something today. Maybe next time you won't be so quick to judge." Costo nodded in agreement. "We're not asking for much," he added, his tone measured. "Just the same respect and decency you'd show anyone else." Carnegie looked up, meeting their eyes. There was a flicker of something, regret, shame, perhaps even understanding. I'll try," she managed, her voice barely audible. With a final nod, the three men turned and walked away, leaving Carnegie standing there, a mixture of emotions swirling within her. As they stepped outside, the cool morning air felt like a fresh breath, washing away the remnants of the night's ordeal. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a gentle glow over the quiet street. James Wilson, the secretary, waited patiently by the sleek black car. He turned to the three young men, a calm smile on his face. "Mr. and Mrs. Grist would like to meet you," he said, his tone respectful but firm. The men exchanged glances, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in their eyes. The weight of the night's events still hung over them, but there was a palpable sense of intrigue. Jock nodded, breaking the silence. "Sure, we'll go," he agreed, his voice steady. The others murmured their assent, the decision made as much out of curiosity as anything else. They climbed into the car, the soft leather seats a stark contrast to the hard benches they had sat on just hours earlier. As the car pulled away, Freddie leaned forward, curiosity getting the better of him. "So who exactly are they?" he asked, glancing at Wilson in the driver's seat. "They don't seem like just any regular old couple," Wilson chuckled, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "You could say that," he replied, eyes focused on the road ahead. "Mr. David Grist is a highly successful businessman, one of the top names in real estate. He's built quite the empire over the years. Costo's eyes widened, his mouth forming a silent wow. He glanced at his friends, sharing their surprise. "So they're like really rich?" he ventured, the awe evident in his voice. Wilson laughed, a light, pleasant sound. "You could say that," he repeated. "You'll see for yourselves soon enough." The car glided through the city streets, finally turning onto a long, tree-lined driveway. As they approached, a grand estate came into view, its grandeur breathtaking. The men stared in awe, the reality of the Grist's wealth sinking in. The sprawling mansion, with its perfectly manicured lawns and elegant architecture, was a far cry from anything they had ever known. As they stepped out of the car, Jock, Freddie, and Costo looked at each other, their expressions a mix of shock and admiration. "They're billionaires," Jock muttered, almost to himself. The realization hung in the air, adding a surreal layer to the morning's events. Wilson led them inside, the cool marble floors and opulent decor leaving the men speechless. Every detail, from the chandeliers to the art adorning the walls, spoke of luxury and taste. They walked through the grand hallways, finally arriving at a large set of double doors. Wilson opened them, revealing a lush garden bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun. In the garden, Mr. and Mrs. Grist sat side by side on a beautiful wrought iron bench. They looked up as the group approached, warm smiles lighting up their faces. The contrast between the couple's elegant, understated presence and the young men's street-style attire was stark. Yet there was a sense of warmth and welcome in the air. Jock, Freddie, and Costo stepped forward, their initial nerves easing in the presence of the kind-looking couple. Mr. Grist stood first, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice sincere and welcoming. Mrs. Grist followed, her movements slow but graceful. The men shook hands with Mr. Grist, their expressions respectful and slightly awed. Mrs. Grist reached out, pulling each of them into a gentle hug. Her touch was soft, her presence comforting. It was a gesture of gratitude and warmth, bridging the gap between their worlds. "We owe you an apology," Mr. Grist began, his voice carrying a note of regret. "We had no idea what had happened to you after you helped us. We are deeply sorry for the trouble it caused." Mrs. Grist nodded, her eyes filled with concern. "We never intended for you to be caught up in such a situation," she added, her voice soft but earnest. "Your kindness meant so much to us, and it breaks our hearts to know that you suffered because of it." Freddie shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's all right," he replied, trying to downplay the seriousness of the situation. "We're just glad you're okay." As the conversation flowed, the topic naturally shifted to the young men's lives. Jock, Freddie, and Costo exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. They began to share their story, each taking turns to add pieces to the narrative. "We've known each other since elementary school," Jock started, his voice warm with nostalgia. "Grew up in the same neighborhood. It's always been the three of us against the world." Freddie nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, we stuck together through everything. Where we come from, you gotta look out for each other, you know? It's a tough place, and if you don't look like you can handle yourself, you're a target." He gestured to his clothes, the street-style outfit that had caused so much misunderstanding. "That's why we dress like this. It's not about wanting to be tough or scary, it's about survival." Costo chimed in, his voice softer. "We had to drop out of high school to help our families. It wasn't what we wanted, but sometimes life doesn't give you much of a choice." He paused, glancing down at the grass beneath his feet. "But we've always had dreams, big ones." The Grists listened intently, their expressions thoughtful. As the young men shared their stories, the couple felt a deep sense of gratitude and responsibility. They remembered the helplessness they felt during the incident at the gas station, and the relief that came with the young men's assistance. It was a kindness that had stayed with them, a gesture of goodwill that went beyond mere words. Mr. and Mrs. Grist exchanged a knowing glance, a silent conversation passing between them. They both knew they wanted to do more than just express their thanks. They wanted to make a lasting impact on the lives of these young men who had shown such unexpected kindness. Mrs. Grist leaned forward slightly, her eyes soft with understanding. "What are your dreams?" she asked gently. Jock hesitated for a moment, then spoke up. I want to be a businessman like Robert F. Smith or Damon John. I want to start my own company, do something that makes a difference. Freddie grinned, his eyes lighting up. I've always wanted to be an architect. I love creating things, designing buildings, seeing them come to life, knowing I built something real. That's the dream. Costo shifted, a small, shy smile on his face. I want to be an artist, like Jean-Michel Basquiat or Cahin de Wiley. I want to create art that speaks to people, that tells a story. The Grists exchanged another glance, their decisions solidifying in their minds. They nodded, their expressions resolute. Mr. Grist leaned forward, his voice steady and sincere. We want to help you, he said, his words clear and direct. We'd like to support you and your families and fund your education. But there's one condition. You have to commit to your studies and make the most of this opportunity. The young men stared at the couple, stunned into silence. The weight of the offer hung in the air, a generous and life-changing proposition. They exchanged uncertain glances, the enormity of the situation sinking in. Jock was the first to speak, shaking his head slightly. That's a lot, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. We can't accept that. It's too much. Mr. Grist chuckled a deep, warm sound. Look around you, he said, gesturing to the grand estate surrounding them. We have more than enough. Money means little if it can't be used to help others. His eyes softened, a kind smile spreading across his face. We want to see you succeed, to see you achieve your dreams. Freddie looked around, taking in the grandeur of the place, the sheer scale of wealth that surrounded them. He exchanged a look with Costo and Jock, a silent conversation passing between them. A slow smile spread across their faces, a mixture of disbelief and hope. They turned back to the Grists, their expressions resolute. Jock spoke for all of them, his voice steady and filled with newfound determination. Okay, he said, nodding. We'll do it. We'll accept your help and we'll work hard. We promise. Mrs. Grist smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. We're so glad to hear that, she said softly. We believe in you, all three of you. This is just the beginning. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the group sat together, a striking tableau of contrast and unity. Mr. and Mrs. Grist, with their silver hair and refined demeanor, sat gracefully on an elegant wrought iron bench. They were the picture of wisdom and grace. In stark contrast, Jock, Freddie, and Costo sat on the lush green grass, their bold street-style clothing and vibrant personalities a testament to their youthful energy. Despite their outward differences, a profound connection united them. This meeting of different worlds, brought together by an unexpected bond, was a reminder that true connection transcends age, race, and background. In that peaceful garden, under the bright morning sun, the contrasts in their appearances melted away, leaving only the unity of their shared experience and the hope for a brighter future. Hey everyone, what a powerful story we just experienced together. It's amazing how a simple act of kindness can bridge the gap between two seemingly different worlds. This tale of three young men and an elderly couple reminds us that appearances can be deceiving and that compassion knows no boundaries. It's about how, even in the toughest circumstances, a helping hand can change lives and create unexpected friendships. The story struck a chord with me because it highlights the importance of not judging a book by its cover. We all have the power to make a difference, no matter where we come from or what we look like. This is a beautiful reminder that kindness can spark positive change, even when it's least expected. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment of unexpected kindness? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going and share our own stories of compassion and understanding. Remember, a little kindness can go a long way.